Welcome, everybody. That's the next episode of the C100 Global Wisdom Talk. And today is a great pleasure that I have Chris Koenemann in our talk today. And it was a great story because I have met, I would say, not in person, but in my ears, in my head. Chris was a guest on my very much appreciated colleague Peter Mostarski on the Foxcast a couple of weeks ago. And I've heard Chris in the car on the podcast, and I found the topic so fascinating, the topic on family culture and how do you develop a family culture, and also what is actually the spiritual capital, because many people talk about spiritual capital, and unfortunately, very few people have an indication what is actually spiritual capital. So, Chris, it is my great pleasure to have you in the talk today. And before we jump in our topic, please give my and our audience just a quick overview. Who is Chris actually?
Thank you, Jan. Thank you for having me on. It's a privilege to be here. I love the background of that story on my side. I love this person on the Autobahn listening to me talk, halfway across the world. What an amazing world we have these days. And on my side, we exchanged emails, I think at like 6:15 in the morning in New York, and we were on the phone by 6:30 in the morning
Perfect.
on my
That's
time. So
that's
it was beautiful.
yeah.
Uh, so a little bit of a background about me. I started as a strategy consultant many years ago. I worked at PwC Consulting. IBM eventually bought us out so that we could consult for those who were not our audit clients. And I did organizational design there. Worked with some amazing people. One of my favorites was Warner Burke, who helped our practice towards the end of his career. His proteges were my bosses, so that was beautiful. I love his model, Burke-Litwin model for organizational design, and uh, I'll say more about that in a little bit. And then I became a monk, a Catholic monk and priest. So I did that for 17 years as a monk, 10 years as a priest. And in that situation, we owned and operated a school, a medium-sized nonprofit, and a parish. And the 20 something of us lived and worked together. And we had all the system dynamics in intensity that a family business will encounter. I became the number two, and I did that for 7 years. So think it's called the prior, but for secular terms, think of executive vice president. And I led our family discussions and also did a little bit of work as CFO. Well, it's called seller, but again, translating. Um, and uh, so led family discussions, met these two psychologists and psychiatrists who helped me to take my org design background and apply it in the family system setting. And that's where I came up with my 8 key conversations in which a family co-creates change that sticks. Um, and they were wonderful. Dr. Michael and Sister Marisha were wonderful to work along. We did a lot of great work. Unfortunately, it's very hard from the inside, which I'm sure anyone from a family business could recognize to heal a situation. And there was some regression. They asked Dr. Michael, Sister Marisha, and me to all stop our work, various works. Um, that led me to the Appalachian Trail. So it led me, well, in short, it led me to the Appalachian Trail. And there I hiked 2,000 miles. So that goes from Georgia to Maine, if people are not familiar with it. It's the longest trail in the world. And it's human grade, just to let you know. All other trails, to translate this, are on animal grade, like so that donkeys and such can go over mountains and carry things to the next village. Whereas the Appalachian Trail is something that only humans are smart or stupid enough to do because it would kill an animal. Anyway, did that and eventually processed everything, started to think about where to go in life. I met an amazing person, and she and I walked together for 500 miles and decided to try life together. So that led us to New York, where she lives and has her her support, and that led me to reapply both of my previous experiences as a strategy consultant, as a priest, and I have a background there in spiritual theology. I have a book, The Grace of Nothingness, um, about how to thrive by God's help. So how to bring all of these different aspects of my life to a new setting, and they call it a spiral career when you bring something new will bring something old for you, but to a new setting. And here I am as a relative startup in the family advising and coaching space.
What an amazing story. Very great. So, Chris, you and I know a very intelligent and a wise man together, and the man is called Jay Hughes. I am a mentee of Jay's activities since September last year, and Jay have developed, and I guess you have also this mentioned, and you are familiar with them. There are four forms of qualitative capital, and one of them is spiritual capital, besides human intellectual capital. Can you give us, and me personally, what is your perspective on spiritual capital? What is it actually? Because if you talk to 10 people, probably you will get 20 response.
Yeah, thank you. I love the qualitative capitals of Jay Hughes. I thought this was something that really spoke to my heart. I love this notion of families reflecting on how to be great families together, right? And the qualitative capitals simply give categories on how to do so. And spiritual capital, he started with gratitude and humility, which I think are bedrocks of spiritual capital and spirituality. And then he was humble enough to step back and say, I think that's my contribution, and so to speak, and um, I think that I love the notion of spiritual capital and all that can mean as far as an underpinning for the values for a family. It's hard to discuss. And so I've come up with a polarity map, which are popular these days, about how to hold a conversation on spiritual capital. Because when people's core values are at stake, and sometimes they disagree, like that's hard. So like let's find a way, because it is important.
Right.
Let's find a way to talk about that. And then I would like to show you this polarity map and talk you through it. Um, that'll also give you the chance to learn a lot more about what I think about spiritual capital as well. So, just a background on polarity mapping. The notion is that some things exist necessarily in intention together. So, breathing is a basic polarity. You have to inhale and exhale. If you do too much of one, it's at the expense of the other. That's how they're in tension together. Other basic polarities are like spending and saving. You have to do one or the other. You have to do both of them. So, too much of one without the other is going to be problematic.
Yes.
Um, Work and recreation. There's so many different ones that we can list, but this is the basic way of polarity mapping. And here, for lack of a better term, I've put spiritual living on one side and natural living on the other side. Now, I'd like to frame this in the broadest of strokes so that anyone can enter into this conversation, even someone who is not religious, even someone who's not even spiritual. I come from my own tradition. I have my own point of view, and that's sprinkled in. But I think this is something that will engage anyone that wants to talk about this topic.
Yes.
The basic goal that we're looking for is a complete human thriving. And the flip side, the risk in any situation really, is human stagnation. But I think this will give us a way of thinking about some of those elements of thriving and human stagnation. I recognize there's a lot on this slide, but it's one of the few instances where actually a lot of words and a map could actually be of some use for people. So on the one side, spiritual side, basic notion is that it's mystic. And that means one's soul and inner peace. I think that can apply to every spiritual tradition, basically. And on the other side, if we're going to put that in a tension with something, it's humanistic, in one's body and intellect, one's thriving in those aspects. Now, we need both, right? And that's kind of the point. Like, we don't want to spend too much time in one pole or the other. Um, Back on the spiritual side, I would add higher power. I think that that is one of the key aspects of spiritual capital I would like to promote, and so very helpful. I think no matter what we believe about spiritual life, spirituality, and we need to think that something's out there helping us. Now, you can call it the universe, you can call it life that's going to keep bringing the same trial over and over again until we learn the lesson we need to learn from it. Um, I don't mind really how people approach it. It's just I think we need a higher power. And think here of like AA's notion of higher power that, we need something to drive us out of ourselves from time to time. And on the other side, we need each other. We need mutual aid. And natural living is great at recognizing that. Um, on the spiritual level, I think they come from a certain point of view, and I would say there's a certain nobility of seeing that as intrinsic to oneself, right? And on the other side, they look around and they're very pragmatic and they figure out how to thrive in the world, and that's important and necessary too.
Yeah.
Um, on the spiritual side, I would again say principled in the sense that they meet each other from a point of view. And on the secular, they meet each other without judgment. And we need all of these things. Like if we had both of these lists, we'd be doing really well. Uh, the flip side is that each side has overuses. And on the spiritual side, I'm just going to go straight down the spiritual list first. We could start to recognize why some of our conversations get pretty difficult pretty quickly, I think. And so we want to be able to sidestep some of these pitfalls. On the first side, it can be ungrounded, right? Sometimes we get lost in the clouds or we navel gaze, and that's a risk. It's not saying that it has to happen, it's just a risk. But more importantly, to conversations, we can get rigid and unfortunately, this is nothing against religion per se. It's that we can get fixed on religiosity. And sometimes that can take the sense that only divine decree can offer enlightenment. And that's certainly a point of view. But it's also tricky to have that conversation under that point of view. Um, there's a sense that sometimes our righteousness can be a stumbling block for ourselves. I know that in my tradition, in the Catholic tradition, there's a lot that's said about how to watch against that. But yeah, being judgmental is a risk for a conversation about this, right? Like we're gonna have to identify that in advance and try to say we're gonna try our best to set that aside during a conversation. Um, and I'm going to come back to the closed-mindedness at the end of each list. So we're going to jump over to the natural living. I think there's a risk there of being overly self-reliant. Um, and that comes with a risk of presumptuous action, maybe even calculated self-interest. But also what I hear a lot about is burnout, right? So this is a risk of being just too engaged in the seeking and the striving and caught up in it. There's a risk of materialism, and that's also on the spiritual side of that. That's everywhere in our life to these days, I'm pretty sure. But you know, we can take that to extremes, to excesses, and to defects. By the way, I think that when you go off the rails, you go off the rails to either to excess, and here it would be hedonistic, or to defect and run away too much from everything. It can be overly skeptical and reduce everything only to a subjective point of view. And that's just a risk for a conversation as well. Lacking meaning and scope is something that I would caution against in this specific conversation of spiritual capital, because when we reduce spiritual capital to legacy capital, I think we risk seeing it as just about ourselves. Like I think there's a sense that like I want you to leave a great legacy, right? But I think it needs to be like within a bigger framework than ourselves, of exiting from ourselves. And I like C.S. Lewis's comment in Abolition of Man, progressing to what? Like what is the great goal? What is the great purpose that everything else is aligning on? Now, what you'll see is that the diagonals are the overuses of one side are the benefits of the other side. So in the spiritual side, you risk being closed-minded to human progress, which is all those great humanistic qualities on the other side of the map. And I would just highlight a few, which is success, neuroscience, psychology, philosophy. Like there's just a lot of points of view there that have valid voices and valid outlooks in this life. On the natural side, you risk becoming closed-minded to what could give you greater hope and joy and peace. And you don't have to like be exactly aligned on what I think is spiritual capital, but I think let's strive for some more hope, joy, and peace in our lives. And let's find a way where we can have that conversation, because something beyond us, meaning beyond us, is going to bring that to us. And so let's find a way that we can talk about a higher power and meaning beyond us in a way that allows us to have this conversation without falling into the pitfalls. Because I think everyone needs to explore that a little bit more. I mean, I come from my own point of view, and I want to go back up to the top and say that I think God is a wonderful term for the universe and this life that keeps bringing, the same trials until we learn them. I think more specifically, I mean, I'm a Christian, I'm a Catholic. I believe that there's something from God that is actually helping us in this life, and the word for that is grace, and it heals and transforms and even perfects us. And I think that gives me a lot of hope. And so I need to at least acknowledge that that's so important in my life. And when trials come, I am able to say all is a grace, and I can learn from this, and I need to keep going. And that's so powerful for me. And my final questions on each side, if you're trapped on the spiritual side, or you start to cringe at some of those comments there, they're there to help. Um, but are you fearing coming incomplete before God? Like, is that driving some of this behavior? And I know I've struggled with that. So I will, this is my polarity map. Someone dared me to write my own polarity map up. Here it is. And part of my book is this theologian overcoming his own tension with God, and it is specifically on that coming in complete before God, and my own self-reliance and overcoming it with living more by God's grace. And on the natural side, I would ask this question, like, how do you see life? How do you see yourself, the unknown, and the future? And we're going to encounter those questions kind of no matter what, even if we avoid them as much as we would like. I think if we stay in either of these overuses for too long, if we stay in one side of the polarity for too long, we risk human stagnation no matter which side we're on. And so we need to learn to get the benefits of both sides of this way of thinking while keeping the best of each side. And yes, I think that means being principled and noble and having a sense of identity that's intrinsic to ourselves. So there's a little map. I could always talk much, much more on this topic, but that's the overview.
That's resonates very well to me. And I would add just my interpretation from spiritual capital, or you call it, is higher power, is I'm actually aware to have full access of myself,
Hmm.
right? And if I have without any fears, without any barriers and stuff like that, just more, I'm curious, what can I actually achieve? what is my full potential in this world, right? And that brings me just into our discussion about my example, what I've built up, and that is just my own 100-year family, right? And it is just also a quite intentional project for myself to leave something behind or beyond my person for the next 100, 200, 500 years on one side, but also on the other side, it is just also a little bit of, in my interpretation, of spiritual capital to be a beacon, to be a beacon for others. Because what I've learned from a very intelligent, very senior individual, he called me sometimes and asked me the question whether I can answer what kind of beacon I am actually, and say, what? I'm not a beacon. I'm young. I'm an individual. I say, no, you are a beacon for others. And you should clearly describe for yourself for whom do you want to be a beacon. Because the main problem in this world, and it was just also in the history and will be in the future, that we are all beacons, lighthouses, but at many of these beacons the light is switched off, right? And we need these lights, a broader light, a large, a tall beacon, and that was just my decision to be a very large and strong beacon with a very bright light, and to set an example with my family to build up just this 100-year family. And here's my first question. I have two daughters, and the oldest is 20 and the youngest is 16, and I have two sons. My oldest is 18 and my youngest son is 10 years. And it is in some cases a little bit not complicated, but it's challenging to bring in front of the younger generation these spiritual um, discussion, right? Because nobody taught them, okay, what is actually a spiritual power or a higher power? Um, can you give me just a little guidance? You what should you advise if I have a discussion with my kids in the next family meeting about spiritual capital? Are there main pillars? Or what should be the direction what I can use?
Uh, oh, wonderful. So I think first and foremost, you have to meet them where they are, and you have to just be gentle. Okay, don't push anything too hard, especially not for people of those ages, right? Like they will push back hard.
Yeah,
Anyone, if you want to have a discussion on values, you have to do it so respectfully, so that none are threatened. Because if you really want this conversation to go badly, it'll go badly very quickly, the sense that one value feels threatened. Like just meet them where they are. Um, as for a witness to spiritual capital, let's also on the level of meeting them where they are, keep in mind that we had a certain point of view on this when we were 16, 20, or whatever. And, we also had a certain point of view at 25, 35, and 45.
right.
And we can't expect them to be our age or our level of maturity on these things. And I think for anyone, the best way of introducing this is a testimonial, just to say, this is what's helped me. And I find the most beautiful ones I've ever heard, and I've heard many, uh, are about mercy or about a higher power. But if someone's bearing their soul of this was my darkest hour, and this is how I got through it, and here's where the higher power hit, or here's where the mercy broke through and the light, the beacon came through at that point, right? That is being a beacon. That is when you can give a testimonial. And a lot of people will say, well, I can't, right? And that's then find someone who can if you really want to do that, right? Like because I think that's something anyone would respect, which is also not pushing on anyone else's values too hard. Does that make sense? Like allow people to just hear, okay, this guy went through something dark. Maybe I, the young person, haven't been through anything that dark yet. Maybe I just need to put in my back pocket that there's something there to help me when that moment comes. And maybe they will become intrigued and want to learn something. But I think at least planting for them that everyone could benefit from some notion of higher power, and there's a journey to be had of finding a higher power. That I think itself would be a big win, right? That anyway, that's my initial thoughts.
Yes, that is much appreciated, and I like these. I would call it the new term higher power, and very much because that is just like a magnet to say, okay, what could be my higher power, right? And how I can help this higher power myself, but also how I can help others with my higher power.
Mhm.
And we are in a current situation that we are starting our discussion and conversation about culture, right? Culture, I use it in my terms to say, okay, what holds us together? And I'm not talking about vision or all these other things,
Mhm.
just more how we can develop in culture what is not so on other words, what will be flexible to evolve because we will grow up, my kids will grow up, I will go in older, maybe I don't know, but the overarching framework, what I call culture, and if I take just from a holistic perspective to say, okay, the ground foundation should be for each individual, for my daughters and for my son, these spiritual capital or higher power discussion. And from there, maybe that is just my thought, and I would be more than curious about what you are thinking about. And from there, just building up the pillars of our family culture. And I remind on myself that you mentioned at Peter's Foxcast, there are different types of family culture, and they are moving. Can you give me just a little advice if we began our discussion in regards of spiritual capital, and then we evolve to family culture? There are some critical patterns that we are look on, or how we can form the picture of culture, because culture is just a huge word, right? And nobody actually, okay, what is it now? Is it this or is it this? Um, do you have certain patterns where you can also measure the culture?
Okay. Um, I'm going to borrow a few concepts from my eight key conversations, and then I'm going to, I think, tick off each of those aspects that you raised along the way. We'll probably stop for a discussion, but I'll try to continue to tick them off.
Yeah,
Um, I think culture is fundamental, right? And it is so critical for the future success of a group that wants a purposeful collaboration together, right? Like to establish something that's life-giving and just yeah, I mean, I don't have a better term than that, right? To establish something where you want to be together, doing something together
fine.
and enjoy it, right? Um, The way I would that's a long process is also another thing I would say. You can't, it's not a quick fix. Culture is something that takes time, especially if you want it to stick, right? So I call my 8 key conversations in which a family co-creates, like you guys have to do the work. I just give you the framework, give you the facilitation. That sticks. And I started with an easy conversation, just looking out from the family together at the external environment because we can learn a lot about each other in a safe way there. Like we're not yet, at each other's throats. So we're starting to think like, okay, we're all looking at this beautiful mountain together, but one's coming at it from this vantage point with this point of view, and another person's coming from this vantage point and observing something completely different about the mountain. And in the process, I'm learning about Jan, I'm learning about everyone else. And it's we're like shoulder to shoulder looking at the mountain, so it's not so hard to have that conversation, right? Um, I think the second conversation I would always start to just survey at a head level, like what are the values that are at play? Like where is each person? And not again, not in anything that's too gonna raise defenses. Um, like looking for where's the commonalities that we can just enhance. Like looking at the accents of what's held in common that we can start say. And that it may be different than we expect, right? Like especially when you're talking about intergenerational conversations, um, I think it's really important for the older generations to listen to the young ones. If nothing else in this conversation, it really helps you to start to appreciate them on their own and how important that is on so many levels. And to just see things from their point of view. And I think you can find a commonality there somewhere. I think everyone more or less is willing to find a commonality there. Um, and even if you have to write it in the broadest of strokes, right? Like even if it has to like step all the way back to we want to be of service to others. Like I don't know where that broadest stroke would be, but you could find something of value to there to kind of have as a core in common. Um, Interestingly enough, this is not applicable in every situation, but I would step back and think of what does the family need from leadership in the future? And this is a thought experiment. This has nothing to do with current leadership, but it allows everyone to think about what do I need from this system and what does the system itself need, right? And it allows everyone to listen again to each other say, well, 10 years, 15, whatever years from now, I probably would need this, and I think the system would need this. And that's formative for everyone, right? And that's helpful. And it's aspirational. Like some of those young people may start to think, okay, I can start to grow in some of those ways if I have certain aspirations. Uh, Um, and then I would start to come around to like what's unstated. Now we're finally at culture. Like what is unstated about the way things are done around here? And that's an interesting conversation because it gets at just those ways that we don't really realize how we live out our values in a way that's kind of lived reality, the heart level, so to speak, of what actually happens or doesn't happen, And that's very revelatory. I have more. There's more to go through. But I may pause for a second and see if that raises anything for you, Jan.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And it raises the question in my mind if I correlate the culture to spiritual or, in my terms, higher power. What can I do to help family members, in this case, my children, to have access to their higher power, to be aware of their higher power? to to try or to become just a sense what their power, what a higher power can be, to feel the higher power. I mean, that is just from a holistic point of view, just a very crucial part that you give others just an inspiration, thought to open the door for them inside to say, okay, let me take a look what I'm actually capable of. Maybe only on one thing. What it is, it doesn't really matter. But to have this feeling there is just more inside of me, because this changes the culture also in regards. Can you give me just an idea? Also, maybe from your past, um, is there a way? Is there a pattern? Is there just a framework? What can be used to have this conversation discussion?
I mean, sure. At this stage, we're talking about the character level of what we say our values are. So, like, we all have that gap between, like, this is what we aspire to be, and this is who we actually are. Um, and the unstated ways of being together can be positive. Like sometimes if you put a light onto a topic that you would never discuss, like forgiveness. You know, you either will know the second the word is said, our family in an unspoken way forgives and moves on, or our family in an unspoken way holds grudges and doesn't talk to each other. And, all of a sudden, yeah, okay, we have the elaborate systems of structural design to ensure that we're siloed and we barely get along because we don't interact as much as possible. You like very quickly you'll see, and no one ever talks about and not one aspect of that is ever discussed, right? It's just the unspoken reality that has happened at this point. Um, and yeah, there's a lot of beautiful things that can be said about forgiveness. Like again, like coming and you can bring them from different traditions if you want. Like every tradition has something beautiful to say about forgiveness. And if you really want to have a spiritual conversation, forgiveness is like a beautiful place, right? Um, Also, like yeah, I mean, I'll just stick with that example for right now. That the lived reality, that character level is very different sometimes than what we say we are together, right? And like we just need to find where are the places that we now then want to say, okay, let's think through it. How do we really want to be together? And that's when I would say the next conversation is this is the way we, everyone, not just what dad wants, not just what, the leaders say that it's supposed to be top down imposed, but how do we want to live together? How do we want to have this purposeful collaboration together? Where will we make our striving here together? Um, and that notion of what's going to bring life to us as a group on this purposeful collaboration. And when you only when you allow everyone to make their contribution there, to say their piece there, that you will actually even start to form the culture, right? You know, a lot of people, there's this beautiful mountain behind you. A lot of people use an iceberg for the notion of culture. We're still only at the top. There's if you think of a water line on that mountain, there's still layers beneath this that we need to get to.
Yeah.
But it's already a beautiful conversation there of how do we want to be together? And let's like think it through. And peacefully, how do we want to be together? Like there'll be some turbulence in that whole process, but like the hope is how do we want to peacefully be together? And how do we want to find joy together, right? Again, those notions of hope, joy, and peace that I was talking about before.
Yeah.
How do we find more of that in our lives together? Um, yeah.
Yeah, so what I can tell you is just I've started in discussion with my with my kids and bring just the term what I've learned from life. Does nothing in life will be happen by accident, and that is just starting the discussion that you never met a person, an individual by accident, and nothing is happened by accident. To make my children more aware, to be more open and more curious. What is life actually, right? And that is what I've started these conversation in regards of or in the direction of my children. So I look on the clock, Chris, and for today, I will come up with my final question. And for all the listeners and all for the viewers, we have agreed for a second part for today, and it will be recorded very soon. And my final question, and first of all, it's I've enjoyed our discussion today. It resonates very much to me. And my question is for today, Chris, if you and I have the opportunity to meet us in 500 years from now, what is your perspective on families? And I will pick up these terms what we are today discussed: higher power and spiritual power. Is your perception that in 500 years from now there are more individuals in higher power or in the awareness of spiritual capital? What is your perception on this?
Oh, I think these things ebb and flow over time, but I think this perdures. I think spiritual capital, I think spirituality, I think God, that like ultimately these things come and go, but there will be a renaissance of this. There's no doubt in my mind. Like this is something that you just can't crush, so to speak. Like I know that right now our age is very secular and a lot of what we talked about in natural living, like we've found values now that we can integrate even better, right? So we can learn from this age too. Our age is very pluralistic at the moment, and we've found that we need to start to get along and learn how to do that, and yet still maintain some of the best
Yeah,
of what it means to be each of us as well. And in time, we will integrate all of this better and better. I think like this is simply a conversation that will happen. And circumstances in this world change too. I like some of these sci-fi shows where um, humanity's technological progress continues on its upward trajectory. I'm thinking here of like The Expanse is a beautiful TV show. Um, but human nature doesn't necessarily follow that exact same trajectory. And human nature is what it is, and that's why these values will always speak to it. This going beyond oneself is always a perennial value. It's always going to be there. And so there's this false notion, I think, that just because technological progress is currently on an amazing upswing,
yeah,
does not mean it's always going to be that way. And it may plateau, and it doesn't mean that humanity suddenly like left behind some of these values. These values are going to continue to knock at the door because we don't always have hope, joy, or peace without them, right? They're going to be there knocking at the door constantly saying, are you burnt out? Are you materialistic? Are you overly self-reliant? Like there's a better combination to have. There's a better way to live.
absolutely true. And I like this very much. And I will add that my projection is that hopefully we will see more individuals and more families there have a clear focus on these spiritual higher power capital, I would call it, because that brings so many power inside of the family, and we need these strong families in the future. And if we have these strong families, I mean that's also replicated. We have strong societies, and we need this over the next decade, centuries, and maybe also in the next 1,000 years. So for now, Chris, it was a great pleasure to have you in the talk today, and yeah, so let's continue with the second episode. But for today, many thanks.
Thank you, Jan. It was wonderful.